I grew up poor, no two ways about it. My family did everything they could to get by, but it was rarely enough. When I was a kid, the other children bullied me to no end, and I didn't have many friends. My parents were never around either. On account of working at least 2 jobs at a time, I couldn't blame them. They were trying to keep whatever shitty apartment we happened to live in at the time. It never worked though. The eviction notices were constant. We could never seem to get ahead in life. The fondest memory of my childhood was when my parents bought their first home. I was 16 at the time and wanted nothing more than to belong somewhere. This was right after my father got a promotion to foreman at the construction company he worked for. I didn't live there long, not even 2 years. But for the first time in my life, I felt as though I belonged somewhere. My parents were happy too. For once in our life, we didn't have to worry about money. I left my parents' home when I graduated high school to attend college on an academic scholarship. I had always done well in school. Despite my unpopularity, I would later graduate at the top of my class and begin my career in finance. After a few years of working my ass off and living like a cloistered monk, I saved enough money to get a home of my own. I longed for the feeling that I had felt when my parents bought their house. In no time, I found out that searching for homes was an abysmal disappointment. I even got to experience a very familiar feeling. Everything I wanted was well out of my price range. Demoralized, I was ready to consign myself to a dumpy place, so long as it was close to work. It would be a step above my efficiency apartment after all. But then I discovered a glimmer of hope. I found a gorgeous old home in my price range. The only unfortunate thing being its distance from my job. I could live with that. It was a real steal. The house shown in the ad was constructed in a breathtaking Victorian style. It stood 2 stories tall and was painted in an eye-catching shade of crimson. There was an iron fence outside and a post where an old-timey sign once hung. It was filled with long hallways, high ceilings, and twisting spiral staircases. It even had a chandelier. It was everything that I had ever wanted. The events following my discovery of the ad are all a blur. I closed on the house and moved in within a month of finding it. The seller was an elderly woman. She seemed keen on selling it as soon as possible. I bought the home for $40,000 under value. It was the deal of a lifetime. Moving all alone was a pain in the ass, but otherwise uneventful. I didn't even have enough possessions to fill the house. Several rooms were left empty. For the first week, I was in a constant state of awe. It felt even better than when my parents had bought their house. I basked in the warm feeling of homeliness that I was experiencing. But then, the strange occurrences started. Small things being out of place characterized these first incidents. It was never an item that you would expect to misplace though, like car keys or my wallet. They were strange things, like the plunger ending up in the dining room or pillows turning up in the kitchen. Following these strange happenings, I began double-checking my locks every night. I suspected one of the neighbor kids had been pranking me while I was at work. I admit this was a bit of a stretch considering that my nearest neighbor was a half-mile away. To my surprise, it continued to occur. Over time, the situation got even weirder. Cabinet doors would open by themselves. The occasional tap would come on without warning. Sometimes, lights would turn off. Every now and again, the thermostat would adjust itself. I didn't know what to make of this. I'm not superstitious, so I figured that someone was getting in through the windows. This, of course, alarmed me, but it was easy enough to remedy. Upon inspection of the windows, I found some of them unlocked. I dealt with this in swift fashion by installing locks on every window, even on the second floor. No one would get into my house now. Over the course of the following weeks, things got worse. Much worse. Doors slammed shut, footsteps roamed the halls, and I swear that I could hear whispers at night. I hadn't considered the possibility of my house being haunted until one day when the walls started bleeding. I was sitting at my kitchen table when it first happened. From the corner of my eye, I noticed a wet, crimson substance oozing from the walls in the hallway. When I turned to face it, I saw, plain as day, that there was blood seeping from my wall. It wasn't a deluge of blood though. It was as though the house had broken out in a steady, heavy sweat. In a state of shock, I tried to wipe it away, but as I did, it disappeared as the rag touched it. It wasn't corporeal at all. Instead, it was like an illusion. As I tried to wipe it away, the phenomena would begin somewhere else. The blood collected on the floor and pooled on the hardwood floor before vanishing. I was never religious or superstitious, but I ran to my cell phone with haste and dialed a local church. A man named Father Firelli picked up. The bleeding stopped while I was on the phone with the priest. Still, I explained to him that something was wrong and that I needed help. He comforted me over the phone and showed up the following day to bless the house. This surprised me, considering that I wasn't a member of his congregation, nor was I religious. He didn't even know me. It turned out that it hadn't been the first time he had been to my house. The old woman who owned the house before me had many similar complaints at first. This greatly reassured me. I now knew that I wasn't crazy. Still though, I didn't like what he had to say one bit. He told me that there is something wrong with the house on a fundamental level, that a previous owner must have committed heinous deeds. This was a mortal issue, one that God had no whim to fix. Despite Father Firelli's reservations, he did as I asked. He went from room to room, blessing the entire house. Upon completion of this task, he told me that moving was the only actual solution. According to the priest, my house was very sick. According to him, something truly horrible had to have happened here. In the weeks following the blessing, things only got worse. The whispers turned into crystal clear voices. They conversed with each other at all hours. They ruminated over what sounded like outdated medical procedures. After a few weeks of pondering what Father Firelli had said, I decided. I was going to move away. No harm had come to me, but I was unwilling to wait around for it to happen. My house was clearly haunted. Not long after deciding, I began seeing people in my house. They wore Victorian-era clothes, and they, like the walls, bled from every orifice. They always appeared to be mutilated in different ways. Some were missing limbs, some had no eyes, tongue, or teeth, and others disemboweled. No matter what fate these beings met, they always had a hollow, emotionless expression. It was truly haunting, especially when I would catch one in the mirror. The horrific entities would wander the halls around the clock. They never spoke to me or even acknowledged my existence. The only thing they ever did was wander the halls as if lost. I would walk into rooms and see them doing abhorrent things. They would mutilate each other with a slew on tools, all while wearing blank expressions. Once, I went into my bathroom to brush my teeth, only to be greeted by the empty visage of one of these spectral men. He had long hair, a thin mustache, a scarred face, and wore a tall black top hat. In his right hand, he brandished a rusty, gnarled looking hacksaw. I wanted to run more than anything, but instead of running, I stood there, paralyzed. It was as if something rooted me to the floor. I was aghast and horrified at what I saw happen next. He approached a woman in a long white dress who was kneeling over my bathtub. She held out a dainty hand to him, which he took and, to my horror, carved through from fingertip to wrist with his saw. He hacked through her flesh and bone, his face contorting in an unnaturally wide grin. His grin became so wide that his mouth fell open, revealing that his mouth was slit from ear to ear. Despite this enjoyment, he remained silent as death. I was still in shock as the woman got up. Her face bore no emotion at all. Instead of writhing in agony, she turned and walked down the hall, allowing thick, dark blood to pour from her mangled hand as she descended the spiral staircase. The sadistic man stood up, saw in hand. He made his way down the hall shortly afterward, walking directly through me. As his spectral form passed through mine, a visceral chill shot through my body. This caused me to shiver violently. He didn't even realize or seem to care that I watched him commit a vile deed. At that moment, I found myself freed from my temporary stasis. I turned from my bathroom and sprinted down the stairs to leave the forsaken house. I couldn't take the never-ending horrors anymore. When I went to grab my car keys, I found only an ancient-looking photo where they usually sat on my kitchen counter. The sepia tone resembled old Wild West photos that I remembered from history classes. Upon closer inspection of the photo, I noticed that it was the same man I saw moments ago. He was standing in front of my home, dressed head to toe in all black. He held the same rusty hacksaw he used to split the woman's hand. Next to him was a wooden sign that said, "Dr. Jones, Fleischmann General Surgeon." Being so engrossed in the photo, I didn't notice that my keys had been sitting next to the photo. After snapping back to reality, I grabbed them and got into my car. While in my car, I called the real estate company. I needed to figure out how to contact the old woman who sold me the house. She had to have answers. I confirmed my theory when I got contact information for the previous owner from the realtor. After a several-hour-long conversation, I found out that my house had been a doctor's office in the 1850s. It served as something much worse later on. Dr. Jones Fleischmann opened his practice in 1851. He worked out of the house until 1857. That was when authorities caught him performing amputations without cause. He would give false medical advice and tell people the only way to cure them was to operate. Disgraced, Fleischmann quit practicing medicine and instead opened a new business. His new career was much more macabre than even what he did beforehand. Fleischmann's new business was a parlor that people could go to spectate tortures. It's alleged that there are dozens of bodies buried on the property, but no one ever cared to look. The good doctor was cunning. He only ever took those who didn't have a family in surrounding towns. Still, despite his careful measures, one family discovered what was going on. The doctor had gotten careless in 1873 and kidnapped a young girl named Annie. Annie's father was an unhinged war veteran who had long suspected the doctor's crimes. One night, he broke into the home, and legend has it that he caught the doctor in the act. Annie's father stabbed Fleischmann almost 100 times, but that was after cutting his mouth from ear to ear with a glass bottle. None of the crimes have ever been confirmed though. According to the town records, Dr. Jones Fleischman died peacefully in his home. No one ever asked questions, seeing as he was loathed by the townsfolk. The woman who sold me the home disclosed none of this for obvious reasons. She informed me that the apparitions are harmless, but they never stop. She also told me they would only get worse the longer I stayed, and to prepare myself for that. It's obvious that these events were true. The doctor's victims have never left this house, and they never will. Instead, damnation and ceaseless torment await them in the house's haunted halls. I'm still trying to sell the house. It has been on the market for almost a year now, and no one is showing any interest. I don't care about losing money on it at this point. I just want it gone. The only problem is that I can't bring myself to not disclose the home's sordid past. Every time a potential buyer arrives, I tell them the truth. I let them know the house is sick. So far now, the home remains my problem. The apparitions are only getting worse, and day by day, I can feel my insanity creeping up on me.